This is Daybreak for Wednesday, January 28th.
It's a tragic accident that brought personal grief and professional setbacks to NASA's space program. The shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after lifting off the launch pad at Florida's Kennedy Space Center. There will be many memorial ceremonies today. The Challenger 7 will be honored by NASA workers who will observe...
Citizen in space teacher Christa McAuliffe. Memorial services are planned around the country today, many organized by school children. In Charleston, West Virginia, a statue depicting McAuliffe is to be dedicated. It is made of more than 1 million pennies donated by youngsters. At the Kennedy Space Center, 73 seconds of silence will be observed beginning at 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time, the moment the Challenger mission began a year ago. CNN will have live coverage of that memorial observance. We will also carry live President Reagan's address to NASA employees via satellite. That begins at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
The families of the Challenger astronauts marked this anniversary by releasing an open letter to the American public. The letter outlines a new plan to continue the crew's mission and calls on Americans to continue to take risks and face challenges. The families say they want to extend the astronauts' work by building space learning centers across the country. They hope to raise $50 million for these so-called Challenger centers. The Challenger Center program can be reached by writing this address.
It was a big push to the moon, and everybody understood when we landed on the moon, and then the shuttle started up, and people kind of got interested again, but then...
Today, the NASA officials believed immediately after the accident. NASA Administrator James Fletcher approved the shuttle's return to flight by February 1988, but that deadline is already slipping, perhaps to 1989.
If the thing slipped downstream a little ways, delay 6 months or even a year, the world isn't going to fall apart.
Fletcher says NASA is well on the way to fixing the shuttle, but larger problems loom ahead.
Restoring public confidence that we can do things if we're supported properly.
And it's the problem of support from Congress and the White House that most worries NASA critics.
Simply fixing the solid rocket motor may prevent another Challenger accident, but we're creating the environment for losing another shuttle sometime in the future.
Should we lose another one, I think that apart from the loss of life, as tragic as that would be, the strategic damage to this country in terms of our ability to function effectively in space is almost beyond description and calculation.
While the U.S. space program was virtually grounded, the Soviets continued to launch their strategic shuttle.
The road signs point to Lompoc, a city of 30,000 in this valley known for its flowers. A year ago, this city was ringing in a new era of the space age, preparing for the nation's first scheduled shuttle launch at nearby Vandenberg Air Force Base. Property values soared up to 10% a year as new homes were built for employees of industry supporting the military shuttle program. The number of hotel rooms was increasing nearly 5-fold. Suddenly, Lompoc's high spirits disintegrated with the shuttle Challenger. The plan to launch a shuttle from Vandenberg was pushed back more than 5 years, and hundreds of former civilian aerospace workers were laid off. Some of them, including John DiMatteo, is still unemployed.
It gets tiring looking through the paper, looking for work.
According to current plans, if a shuttle is ever launched on the West Coast, it won't be before 1992. That's so far off that the shuttle is no longer top priority here at Vandenberg, where Air Force personnel have shifted their attention to more pressing matters, such as the Titan missile program. Today, there are more than 1,200 hotel rooms in Lompoc Valley, but as few as 1 in 3 is occupied. So far, one hotel has gone out of business, and others are barely hanging on.
By having not launched the next space shuttle mission by its February 1988 target date. That's what NASA Administrator James Fletcher said this morning on ABC. Fletcher says the space agency will not launch the next shuttle until it is convinced it's absolutely safe to do so. The NASA chief says the Challenger disaster dealt a setback to the space program that was much greater than he originally realized. It was 1 year ago that Challenger space shuttle exploded in midair, killing 7 Americans. Today, their families sent an open letter to the nation asking for help in building a tribute to the Challenger crew. For more information on this project, you can write Challenger Center, Post Office Box 90077, Washington, D.C. 20090. Relatives say the center will be a place where children can get hands-on experience with space technology. And in the second half hour of Day Watch, we'll have live coverage of the memorial observance at Kennedy Space Center.
We remember Dick Scobee, We remember Michael Smith, who earned enough medals as a combat pilot to cover his chest. We remember Judith Resnik, known as JR to her friends. We remember Ellison Onizuka, who was a child running barefoot through the coffee fields and macadamia groves of Hawaii, dreamed of someday traveling to the moon. We remember Ronald McNair, who said that he learned...
Years since the Challenger catastrophe, and coming up in just a few minutes, at 38 minutes past this hour, NASA centers around the country will observe 73 seconds of silence to honor the 7 shuttle crew members killed in the explosion. 73 seconds was the period from launch to the explosion that sent Challenger plunging into the Atlantic. CNN will carry the observance at the Kennedy Space Center live.
We will be switching live to the Kennedy Space Center momentarily, and we'll bring you the memorial ceremony that commemorates the first anniversary of the Challenger disaster. At 11:38 Eastern Time, it lifted off from pad 39B. 73 seconds later, that last mission had ended in the tragic explosion. As we know, all 7 crew members were killed, and the live coverage of that event became a powerful and sad memory in America's consciousness. A number of family members of the Challenger crew presented Vice President George Bush an artist rendition of one of the planned Challenger space centers. This happened this morning in the old executive offices building next to the White House. The family members also left some Challenger patches to be given the White House staff. Before then, they left for their own private memorials for their dead relatives, their fathers, and their husbands. And following the Florida ceremonies, we will have here in the studio 2 experts on the space program, who are Wayne Biddle of Discover Magazine and Professor Robert Jastrow. They'll be joining us in the studio, and they'll be discussing some of the pros and cons of where we have been and where we are going with the space program itself, and more likely with respect directly to the space shuttle program. Have the ills of the program been cured, and are we going on further into the stars, and when? When is one of the questions which Dr. Fletcher and others have been addressing lately. When will the shuttle be able to fly once again? Can it meet the target date early next year or not? Let's go now very briefly and shortly to the Kennedy Space Center. It was a cool morning. It was 33 degrees a moment ago at the Kennedy Space Center, but with sunrise and warming, it gradually got up to the current 57 degrees. A much warmer and brighter day it was this morning at sunrise than it was there a year ago. We're going to see some familiar scenes that everybody who's been connected with the space program has seen before. There's going to be some difference here. There is no launch plan today, simply the memory of something that happened 1 year ago.
Americans paused this morning to mark the sad event of this day a year ago, the in-flight explosion of the shuttle Challenger, which took the lives of all 7 crew members. President Reagan will speak by satellite to NASA employees at 3 Eastern Time, noon Pacific. CNN will have live coverage of that in about 15 minutes. Some relatives of the Challenger crew presented Vice President George Bush with an artist rendition of a proposed space learning center. They're hoping to raise $50 million to build the centers where citizens could, in their words, reach out and touch the future. The centers would memorialize the Challenger crew. NASA halted work today at the exact time of last year's launch and maintained silence for the 73-second duration of the flight.
West Virginia officials plan to unveil a statue at this hour of the woman who was to have been the nation's first teacher in space. The bronze statue depicts Christa McAuliffe looking toward the sky with one hand poised over an open book. It's symbolic of the journal she planned to keep while in orbit. The statue was largely paid for by pennies donated from West Virginia school children. A portrait of McAuliffe was presented to her home state of New Hampshire today by the director of the NASA Teacher in Space program. A private observance was held at the school where she taught.
A majority of Americans surveyed blame the Challenger disaster on NASA officials rather than on technicians who actually worked on the project. A New York Times CBS poll of some 1,500 adults shows that 60% hold NASA officials responsible. 13% put the onus on scientists and engineers, and 8% say both were at fault. The poll shows that most Americans still support the shuttle program. 66% of those polls said that despite its risks and costs, the program is worthwhile, while 28% said it was not. Public support, however, has diminished from last year. A Times CBS poll taken a few days after the disaster showed that 80% of those questioned felt the program to be worthwhile, compared with 14% who opposed it. Now the latest inductees to pro football's Hall of
Good afternoon and welcome to the International Hour. I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Ralph Wingy and Donna Kelly will be joining me shortly from our Atlanta headquarters. But first, we will hear from President Reagan, who will commemorate this first anniversary of the Challenger shuttle disaster with NASA employees by satellite. We will be bringing you that satellite message, of course, from the Oval Office. Earlier today, NASA held its own memorial of silence. For 73 seconds past 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time, there was no sound at that part of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. One difference, the temperature was 57 degrees at that moment, not the frigid 33 degrees that may have been a major contributing factor to last year's tragedy. Those 73 seconds, the length of that Challenger flight, were also observed silently around the nation, in schoolrooms, in businesses, and in government. And as we say, President Reagan now prepared from the Oval Office to address the NASA workers and the nation. Let's go to the Oval Office and the President.
Today is a day to commemorate and a day to salute. We commemorate the magnificent Challenger 7, whom we lost last year at this time, and we salute you, the men and women of America's NASA team. America will never forget that terrible moment a year ago when our elation turned to horror and then to grief and pain. 7 of our finest perished as they reached for the boundaries of space, where Earth ends and the path to the stars begins. No, we will never forget them. They represented so much of the best that is in our land. They were Dick Scobee and Michael Smith, both heroes of battle, both experienced test pilots, both with the heart and soul the great explorers have always had, always searching, always reaching. There were Judith Resnik, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, and Gregory Jarvis. They were pioneers of the mind as well as the stars. From every corner of America they had come, and from many backgrounds, to join hands in a common adventure. Don't they, by their example, tell us just why it is our blessed land has become so great? And of course, there was Christa McAuliffe, whose profession was among humanity's most honored and revered, that of a teacher. She had hoped on that mission to give history's first lessons from space, lessons that were to be beamed to school children across America and around the world. Well, she never got to give those lessons in space science, but she and the others did teach America's children something nevertheless, something precious, something enduring, something perhaps more valuable than any other lesson they will ever learn. I remember in the hours and days following the tragedy, there was talk of the permanent trauma the children of America might suffer as a result of viewing the shuttle disaster. And yes, the events that day did leave their impression on them, but not the one that we feared. No, instead, one that can make us all proud of the strength and spirit, the courage and love of our young people. You can see that lesson reflected in one simple fact. The number of new memberships in our Young Astronauts program has never been higher. This past year, I spoke to a meeting of the young astronauts, and I can tell you that another place that lesson is reflected is in those young astronauts' eyes. They know that exploration has its risks. They know that with adventure also goes danger. They know all this, but they also know something far more important, something about the spirit and sense of joy that have kept man reaching through the ages to grasp for the limits of his universe and beyond that. Despite hardships and peril, kept explorers like Columbus, Magellan, and Drake sailing into uncharted oceans that, despite comforts they left behind, kept pioneers like Boone, Carson, and Clark crossing America's frontier, that keep us still reaching for the unknown. Christa McAuliffe and all the magnificent Challenger 7 taught this lesson of courage, spirit, and love to America's children. And now it's for all of us to learn the lesson from them. This has been a year of careful self-examination at NASA. Under the able leadership of Jim Fletcher, you've moved quickly to implement the recommendations of the Phillips Task Force and the Rogers Commission, and have just completed a broad and important reorganization. Everyone in the NASA team has again shown their dedication, their commitment to excellence, and now NASA has begun to resume its forward progress. This year we mark the third decade of space exploration. In those 3 decades, with NASA in the lead, mankind has received images from the outer reaches of our planetary system, sampled the climate of Mars, learned new and undreamed of truths about our own planet, and landed a man on the moon. In the next 3 decades, NASA will again lead in mankind's dreams. In just 2 years, Voyager 2 will pass Neptune and unlock for us the secrets of that distant brother to our own Earth. By the end of the next decade, the Galileo orbiter and probe will tell us more than ever before about Jupiter, and the Hubble Space Telescope will be in orbit, looking into deep space, helping us understand the creation of solar systems like our own. And in an international project, the Ulysses probe will teach us more about the sun. These unmanned projects are the scouts for manned space travel of decades to come. In the next decade, we in America will continue man's personal adventure into space. He will soon be starting development on the space station to have it ready by the mid-90s. The space station will be our gateway to the universe, our foothold in outer space, the keystone of our space program. With it as our base camp, we will be able to reach the planets and perhaps one day to the stars. We hope our friends and allies will join us in this great adventure. But that's not all you'll be doing in the decade and more to come. Here at home, you'll be shrinking the Earth as humanity never before dreamed. You will be developing a space plane so that one day ordinary travelers can take off on the east coast of the United States and land in Japan a little over 2 hours later. And one other thing. In the next decade, we will build and fly a new space shuttle. For me, this is a special commitment. In the first moments of grief and shock, the bereaved families of the crew urged us to carry on and keep the space program moving forward. We owe it to them and to those whom we, too, lost to do just that. Now, I know that voices have been raised from time to time saying, oh, yes, it's exciting and adventurous, but does it have any practical value to justify its costs? Well, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Perhaps we've been derelict in not doing more to make known the literally thousands of human-oriented technological developments that have spun off from the program and which will affect all our lives and the lives of our children and our children's children. There's every reason to believe these spin-offs will become of tremendous value. Already they include life-saving technologies like the programmable heart pacemaker, the CAT scanner, and life-saving fireproof vest for firemen. Space spin-offs have made drinking water safer for communities in developing countries. Technology from the lunar rover now makes it possible for paraplegics to drive automobiles and drive them safely. Our automobile engineers in Detroit are using lightweight, super strong plastic-like materials, outgrowths of space program technology, to reduce the weight of cars. For consumers, that means more miles per gallon. And in the future, the space program will be making materials in space where we can manufacture in 1 month's time life-saving medicines that would take 30 years to produce here on Earth. I understand that a project is now being developed to pass on to all Americans specific knowledge of this aspect of the space program. The United States Space Foundation, a nonprofit educational foundation, is preparing a series of TV and radio public service statements so that all Americans will be aware of these achievements and how they will benefit all of our lives. I think this is a worthy effort. Yes, whether it's in the exploration of space or the applications of space research here at home, the future to which you are leading us is bright. The challenge that you're shouldering for all mankind is one that we cannot turn away from. We owe it to our children and their children and generations beyond. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to those who, with all their love and joy and courage, taught us again just 1 year ago today that mankind's reach must exceed its grasp, or what's a heaven for. Thank you all. God bless you.
1 year ago today, in memory of the Challenger 7, President Reagan addressing NASA employees nationwide live from the Oval Office. Donna?
Across the country, Americans are remembering the 7 who perished on board the shuttle. A NASA official presented the state of New Hampshire with a portrait of Christa McAuliffe. McAuliffe was to have become the first teacher in space. The father of astronaut B.Jarvis laid a wreath in honor of his son at an Orlando, Florida park. And family members of mission specialist Ellison Onizuka are planning an observance this weekend. They're holding a luau in Houston in honor of the Hawaiian native.